Most people don't get to see what their choices actually cost them. I did. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 104 years old. And the one thing I wish someone had told me when I was 50 is something so quiet, so ordinary, that you might almost miss it. I was born in 1920, in a small house in rural Ohio, the second of 4 children. My father worked at a grain mill, and my mother kept everything together the way mothers did back then, without being asked, without being thanked, without stopping. I watched her do that my whole childhood, and I thought, when I grow up, I'm going to be different. I'm going to have my own life. I'm going to be someone. And I was. I became someone. I spent 60 years becoming someone, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. Let me tell you about a Tuesday afternoon in 1970, because that's really where this story begins, even though I didn't know it at the time. I was 50 years old. My husband Gerald had been gone for 6 years by then. A heart attack. Sudden. The kind that doesn't warn you. We had 2 children, a son named Paul and a daughter named Miriam. Paul was 24 and living in Pittsburgh, working at an engineering firm. Miriam was 22 and had just moved to Boston with her college boyfriend, a young man named Thomas, who would eventually become her husband. They were both gone from the house, and I was alone for the first time in my adult life. And I remember thinking, finally I can breathe. Finally I can figure out who I am. That feeling, I want you to understand, was real, and it was earned. I had spent 25 years raising those children, largely on my own even before Gerald died, because he worked long hours and I was the one who was home. I was the one who packed the lunches and sat with the Fevers and drove to the school plays and held everything together the way my mother had, the way I swore I wouldn't have to. And when those children left and the house went quiet, there was a part of me that felt something close to relief, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it was honest. What I did with that relief, though, that's what I've spent a long time thinking about. I went back to work. I had a degree in accounting that I'd never really used, and a neighbor of mine, a woman named Ruth Cassidy, she was running a small bookkeeping business out of her home, and she needed help. I started working with Ruth 3 days a week, and within 2 years I had taken over most of the client work, and within 5 years I had started my own practice. By the time I was 60, I had 14 clients and 3 part-time employees, and I was doing something I was genuinely good at, something that used a part of my mind that had been sitting quiet for decades, and it felt wonderful. I want to be honest about that. It felt wonderful. I was proud of myself. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was doing something that was mine. Not Gerald's wife, not Paul and Miriam's mother, mine. Eleanor Marsh, who runs her own business, who is competent, who people call when they need help, who solves problems, who matters in a room. And my children called, of course. They called on birthdays and on Sundays, and I called them back and we talked, and it was fine. It was warm enough. Paul got married in 1974 to a woman named Diane, and I went to the wedding, and I liked Diane very much. Miriam and Thomas had their first child in 1976, a boy named James, and I drove to Boston for the birth, and I stayed for 2 weeks, and then I came home because I had clients. I had responsibilities. I had a life. Here is the thing about choices you make when you're in the middle of your life. They don't feel like choices at the time. They feel like just the next reasonable thing to do. Paul calls on a Sunday and you're finishing up the quarterly reports for the hardware store on 5th Street, and you think, I'll call him back tomorrow, and you do call him back, and the conversation is pleasant and nothing is lost, or so it seems. Miriam invites you for Thanksgiving and you go. You're there, you sit at the table and you hold James on your knee, and you help with the dishes, and you drive home on Sunday, and you feel like you've done the thing you were supposed to do, like you've been a mother. But being present in the room and being present with the people, those aren't the same thing. I know that now, in a way. I didn't know it then. When I was sitting at Miriam's Thanksgiving table, I was there, yes. But I was also somewhere else. I was thinking about the Morrison account and whether I'd made an error on the third quarter projection. I was thinking about the new client I was meeting on Wednesday and whether I'd prepared enough. I was there with my body, and I was somewhere else entirely with my attention, and my grandchildren grew up with a grandmother who was physically present at the important occasions, and emotionally somewhere else almost entirely. My daughter Miriam. I need to tell you about Miriam because she's the heart of what I'm trying to say. Miriam was a sensitive child, the kind of child who noticed things, who felt things deeply, who needed more than the average amount of reassurance. As a small girl, she used to come into the kitchen and just stand near me while I was cooking, not talking, just being close. And I used to think, what does she want? Why doesn't she say something? And I'd find something for her to do. A task, a job, a way to be useful. I didn't understand that what she wanted was just to be near me. That was enough for her. Just near me. She grew into a woman who was still like that, who reached toward the people she loved, who needed warmth, who called not because there was news, but just to talk, just to connect. And I was not always patient with those calls. I loved her, let me be clear. I loved her the way you love your own heart. But I was not always patient. I was busy. I was in the middle of something. I'd say, Miriam, can I call you back? And sometimes I would call back, and sometimes the day would swallow the intention, and I wouldn't. And she would call again a week later, and neither of us would mention it. This went on for decades. This is what I mean when I say, the choices don't feel like choices. Decade after decade of small moments where I chose the work or the distraction or the thing that felt urgent over the person who was simply asking to be known by her mother. And Miriam never complained, or almost never. She was not a complaining woman. She learned, the way children do, the shape of what was available, and she loved me within that shape. I retired at 78. My knees were giving me trouble, and my eyes were getting worse, and I thought, well, it's time. And I expected, I think I genuinely expected, that retirement would be a door opening, that I would suddenly have all this time, and I would step into my family's life, and they would step into mine, and everything I'd been too busy for all those years would simply be there waiting. I thought relationships were like money in a savings account, that you could go back and make a withdrawal, and the account would be full. That is not how it works. I know that now. When I retired and I started calling more often, Paul was warm enough, but our conversations had a quality to them, a slight stiffness, like two people who have been polite strangers for a long time suddenly trying to have an intimate friendship. We didn't know each other the way I'd assumed we did. I knew the facts of his life, his job, his house, his children's names and ages. But I didn't know him, not the way you know someone you've been really paying attention to. There were things he cared about deeply that I was only discovering in my late 70s, things that had probably been true about him for 30 years. With Miriam, it was different and harder. Miriam had built her warmth somewhere else. She had her own friends, her church, Thomas, her children. A whole rich interior life that I had watched from a polite distance for decades. And when I came closer, she let me in. She was not cold. Miriam was never cold. But I could feel that she had learned not to need me. She had done the grief of not having me the way she needed me years before, quietly, on her own. And she had come out the other side of it, and she was whole, and she was kind to me, and it was not the same as what it would have been. I'm not telling you this to punish myself. I did that for a while, the punishing, and it doesn't help anything. It doesn't give anything back. I'm telling you because at 104 years old, lying in this bed, what I can see so clearly is the thing I couldn't see at 50, which is that the work was not as important as I believed it was. The clients did not remember me. The business was sold when I retired to a young man named Kevin, who is probably retired himself by now. The pride I felt, the competence, the being someone, the mattering in a room, all of that faded the way everything fades. And what was left, what is always left at the end, is only the people. And the question is not whether you loved them. I loved my children. I love Miriam right now, at this moment, more than I can say. The question is whether you made them feel it, whether your love was something they could actually feel, like a hand on their face, like a presence in the room, or whether it was just a fact about you that lived quietly inside you, where nobody could get to it. Miriam passed away 4 years ago. She was 78, and it was cancer, and it was fast, and I was already in care by then, and I couldn't get to her at the end. I couldn't be there. And that is something I will carry for however many days I have left. Paul is still alive. He's 82. He calls on Sundays. And I love those calls. I look forward to them all week. And sometimes I think, this is what Miriam was doing. All those years when she called and I was busy or distracted or half present. She was doing this. She was reaching for me. And I didn't always reach back. My great-granddaughter came to visit me last month. She's 17. Her name is Sophia. She's Miriam's granddaughter. And she sat in the chair next to my bed, and she asked me what I thought about when I couldn't sleep, and I told her some of what I've told you. And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Were you happy, though? In the work, were you happy?" And I thought about it honestly, and I said, yes, I was happy. And I don't think happiness was the mistake. I think the mistake was believing that I had time, that there would be a later for the closeness, a someday for the real conversations, a future version of myself who would be less busy and more available, and who would do the being present that I kept postponing. That future version of me was always just ahead, just around the corner, always, almost here. She never arrived, that version of me. 50 became 60, became 70, became this bed, this room, this window, with the afternoon light coming through it, and the people I loved most, shaped by the amount of attention I gave them, no more and no less. If you are 50, if you are reading this or hearing this and you are somewhere in the middle of your life, I want to say something to you plainly. The work will ask everything of you, and give back what it gives back, and then it will end, one way or another, and that will be fine. That will be as it should be. But the people are not waiting in a savings account. They are alive right now, today, and they are being shaped by whether you are with them or somewhere else in your head, and they will carry the shape of your attention or your inattention for the rest of their lives, and so will you. I am 104 years old, and I have had a long and genuinely interesting life, and I would not trade most of it. But if I could go back to one afternoon, one ordinary Tuesday, in 1970, when my daughter called and I said, "I'll call you back," I would put down whatever I was holding, and I would pick up the phone and I would say, "Miriam, I'm here. Tell me everything." And I would mean it. And I would listen. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. I'm here. Tell me everything. And mean it. It costs nothing. It takes only what you're willing to give. And you have it to give. Right now. Today. More than you think you do. I hope you give it.